Fair fa your renaissancey faces, welcome to the Whisky Kitchen. This is my new home for Whisky Web Wednesday. We did the house move last weekend. I've got a few more grey hairs in my head after a lot of going up and down stairs and a lot of moving things around. But yeah, we're here, we're in the new house, and it's all good. We've got a beautiful view of the fields out the front there that we'll show you at some future point. Deer roaming around and the barley's coming up, so it's looking great. So welcome to the new place. And I thought, for a new home, why not do a first video on new make? So for this video, it's going to be an introduction about the factors that influence new make and the quality of new make and the flavour of new make. So if you're interested in how whisky is made and you'd like to know a little bit more about the determining factors of what makes whisky such a great spirit, then hopefully this video helps you. So we'll start off with a wee bit of going through the factors for new make spirit. New make spirit is essentially the spirit that comes off the still at the distillery. So it's clear new make spirit that comes off, a lot like this here, which we'll go through later. So the important factors to think about when you're assessing a new make spirit is, first of all, the grain. What grain is it made of? Is it malted barley? Is it unmalted barley? Is it wheat? Is it corn? Is it rye? So there's lots of different grains that can be used for making whisky, and each has its own specific flavour profile. So for malted barley, you're going to get a lot of those lovely biscuity flavours and a lot of the maybe like honey or malty flavours that you get in, say, Ovaltine. For rye, you're going to get more spice. For corn, you're going to get more kind of Play-Doh and sweetness. So yeah, every grain has a different family of flavours. Next is fermentation. So once you've mashed with the grain, what's the fermentation like? Is it short? Is it long? Do you use multiple types of yeast? Do you just use one type of yeast? Typically, if it's a long fermentation, you end up with a fruitier spirit. If it's a short fermentation, then you might end up with a less fruity spirit. The still shape is a key factor. So tall stills mean that the spirit vapours have more distance to travel before they get through to the condenser. So you're only going to take the lightest vapours through. So you'll end up with a lighter spirit. If it's a short and stumpy still, then it's going to be the heavier compounds that get through as well. So you'll end up with maybe a meatier, heavier spirit. And that's particularly good for peated whisky as well. Also, the shape of the line arm is important. So if the line arm at the top of the still is downward sloping, it's going to allow more of the compounds and volatiles to get over and into the condenser. If it's upward sloping, more of them are going to fall back into the still and get redistilled. Redistillation is often called reflux. So the more reflux there is, then the lighter your spirit's going to be, and probably the cleaner as well. And then we come to the method of distilling. So this is where the distiller's art is really defined. So it's up to the distiller to choose the cut points for the run. So every run is split into heads, hearts and tails of the spirit run. And where you choose the cut points for those hearts is really important. If you have a wide cut, then you're going to introduce more fainty flavours or more peat flavours. If you have a narrow cut, you're going to end up with a narrower flavour profile, but probably a sweeter, cleaner whisky. And it's just getting that balance right between the two. The pace of distillation is really important. So the harder you run the stills, the more of those compounds you're going to push over. You might end up with a more sulphury, heavier spirit. If you run it slowly and just sort of gently tickle those volatiles over, you'll end up with a lighter spirit. So the steam level, or the amount of energy you put into the still, is a crucial impact. And the more copper contact time you have within the still, so the slower you go, then the more you're going to take out those sulfury compounds from the spirit. Also, the number of times you distill. This is obviously a key one. If it's 2 times distilled or 3 times distilled, that's going to be a major impact on what the spirit is like. Most scotches, of course, are 2 times distilled, but if you look at Irish whiskey, you'll get more 3 times distilled. And if you have Scotch and Irish whiskey side by side, you'll notice that there's quite a big difference in the weight of the whiskey, the complexity of the whiskey as well. So 3 times distilled is definitely a lighter, cleaner product than maybe 2 times distilled. And also condenser, that's another key factor right at the end of the distillation. So for the condenser, you have shell and tube condensers, which are just like a tube, a vertical tube, quite common. But the old style is the worm tub condenser, and this is like a copper snake within a kind of like a cylinder, and it's better in a way because you end up with a more copper contact during the condensation stage, but they're more difficult to maintain and they're more traditional, older style. If you can imagine just making like a shell and tube condenser versus actually crafting like a copper spiral that gets a smaller and smaller diameter as it goes down, it's quite a different difference in sort of art and craft in terms of production. So yeah, many different factors in terms of the new make, but these are some of the main ones. It's not all of them, it's not an exhaustive list, but this is like the key ones that will give you a difference between spirit A and spirit B, spirit C. So let's just try a couple now and see some of the differences. And when you're visiting a distillery, I'd always ask to see if you can try the new make, just to see if you can experience it yourself, and then you'll get more of an idea of the distillery character that's in the whiskey versus the wood influence. And they often say that distillery character is maybe like 30–40% of the whiskey flavour, and then the wood influence is more like kind of 60–70% even. So the more you can identify those influences, then I think the more interesting you find your whiskey journey. So this one here is from Deanston Distillery in Scotland. It was distilled on the 11th of July 2018 and at 63.5% alcohol. So what you'll find with Scotch is that the new make spirit is often diluted down to 63.5% alcohol before it goes into the barrels. And this seems to be the optimum strength for spirit interacting with the wood. And also for economics as well, in terms of the amount of bottles you get per barrel, things like that further down the line. Straight away I'm picking up those malty aromas. Takes me on like a cereal journey, this. There's something sweet in there as well, almost like a toffee or a caramel. And a note you often get in new make spirit, which you don't tend to get in the final product of whiskey, is almost like a hot stones kind of flavour. It's very interesting. If you think of the sauna, when somebody throws the water on the stones, is that kind of smell you get. Hopefully without the sweat. Fruits are coming through now. You're always going to get a lot of warmth, a big warm hug whenever you're having a sip of new make, because it tends to be a lot stronger than anything that's in the bottle. Because what happens typically is when new make goes into a barrel, over time the ABV drops. That's the normal scenario for a Scotch. In some parts of the world it's the other way around. The ABV actually goes up in the barrel, depending on humidity and temperature. But yeah, it's quite fiery, it's quite strong, so this is why we mature whiskey, to mellow it out a bit and just make it a bit more approachable for the end consumer. But when you've tried a lot of these, you get to know them, and they're absolutely delicious. And I like the DNA of the distillery. I like the spirit of it. It's like this is true aqua vitae in my view. Now this one here is actually a sample from Victoria Caledonian Distillery in Victoria, and this one's interesting because it's a peated new make spirit. These guys actually won Best New Make Spirit in the world recently at the World Whisky Awards, so congratulations to Victoria Caledonian for that. But I just thought I'd try a bit of their peated new make. And the interesting thing about this is they actually peated it by doing a soak and smoke, because we don't have any malting facilities in BC yet where we can do a traditional peated malt, and we have to find other ways. So for this one they bought pale malt and then soaked it and then smoked it with barley, or sorry, with peat, with I think local peat, and that was a way of getting round the issue of not having a peated malting facility in BC. There's actually quite a lot of tropical fruits on this. Getting a lot of pineapple, papaya, guava, and then the smoke's coming through, and it's a nice gentle smoke. Yeah, it's a really nice combination, the fruitiness and the smokiness coming together. Sweet and smoky, delicious. On the palate, you definitely get more of the smoke. It comes out more, a bit more dominant than on the nose. It's a slight ashiness to it as well. Kind of reminds me of that sort of Bowmore ashiness a little bit. And I would say for this new make spirit, it's probably maybe a narrower cut than say Lagavulin. I think Lagavulin, they go like really low, down to maybe 58% ABV at the end of their cut, whereas this one is probably a bit higher, I think, because it's not so fainty. The thing is, if you're going to age your whiskey for a long period of time, like a 16-year-old Lagavulin, then that gives you more time to change those fainty aromas into like nice flavours like leather, tobacco. Faints is kind of like tails. It's the end of the hearts and it's the beginning of the tails. It's that period where you start getting some, maybe like, it's almost like sardines or diesel, or like some of those flavours that aren't so pleasant, but if you just have a hint of them, they can be delicious. But because this is going to be aged for a shorter period of time, maybe 5-6 years, I think they've done a narrower cut. So that's part of the distiller's art as well. It's just thinking about how long the spirit's going to be aged for, and what's the ultimate profile for the spirit for that particular future expression. So I hope you've enjoyed this little tour of some of the factors that influence new make quality and flavour. Any questions, please let me know in the comments below. Let me know if I can change the setup at all. I've got the Whisky web sign here from Russ Campbell, so thank you very much for that. And please like and subscribe. And yeah, we'll see you around for future videos from the Whisky Kitchen. Cheers!